I thought it was going to be like.
And it's on the Discovery Channel.
Apparently.
All right, calling to order the City of West Sacramento regular meeting of the West Sacramento City Council, the West Sacramento Redevelopment Successor Agency, and West Sacramento Financing Authority, October 1st, 2014. We have no closed session items to report tonight, so we'll start this meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Lowell, would you please lead us?
Oh my goodness.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, the first item on the agenda is presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda within the jurisdiction of the council. So the council is prohibited from discussing issues not on the agenda brought to them at this time. According to state law, which is the Brown Act, items must first be noticed on the agenda before any discussion or action. We have one request to speak. Mr. Lowell.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. William Lowell, West Sacramento for the record. And downtown Sacramento, since L Street has been closed off, I think our leaders in Sacramento should reconsider blocking off Capitol Mall as well as the Tower Bridge, because it really messes up our YOLO bus service between West Sacramento and downtown Sacramento. And this last weekend, I'm glad I didn't try traveling on Sunday, but even Saturday, that railroad arm got stuck, and so our buses were delayed for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and on Saturday, and so it was kind of frustrating, to say the least, and come a week from Saturday, the 11th, from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. on the west steps of the state capitol, there's going to be a rally against bullying, and I understand October is anti-bullying month, and I sent a letter to Senator Steinberg, since so much of what he was talking about, well, I experienced a lot of that when I was growing up, all through high school, but especially through the second grade. But I remember after the second grade, my parents sent me to live with my grandparents for a couple of years, and the first thing I noticed with my grandparents, my granddad was a minister, and I suddenly noticed in their home there was no shouting, no cussing, no speaking ill of others, and so it taught me to not to want to fight other kids that made fun of me when I had seizures, and but I still got bullied somewhat all the way through high school, and I think it was because I was shy. Well, before going back to school at junior college, from one set of parents to the other, why, I decided I was going to start pretending I was no longer shy, break out of that shell of shyness, and I started developing my silly sense of humor, or deliberately misinterpreting key words of what these guys were saying when they were about ready to get into a fight. And so I would, again, deliberately misinterpret those key words and change their sadness or madness to laughter. And so I have not been in a fight since 1957. And I've prevented many fights from occurring, whether they be in classrooms or public meetings or bus stops or whatever. And so as I stated in my letter to Senator Steinberg, if it can work for me that well all these years, why can't it work for others? And when you overcome shyness, I think that's sort of a key step to overcoming fear of others too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowell. All right, on to item 1B, council communications or assignments. Do we have any reports? Mr. Christoph.
Yes, LAFCO met last Thursday, and the main topic of discussion was the shared workshop, service workshop that is going on between LAFCO and all of the cities, the city managers and their assistants. And we are going to delay it until after the first of the year because there are some issues with broadband and issues with animal control. And so there's some things that need to really get sort of straightened out first before we have the shared workshop. And that'll wait until after the first of the year.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you,
Mr. Lesnar?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. We met earlier this afternoon or this evening, the Sacramento Yellow Port Commission, and there was really only one consent item of consequence regarding a grant we received. So other than that, that's all we have to report. Thanks.
Thank you. No further communications reports. Okay, item 1C, council appointments, reappointments, removals from city and non-city boards and commissions. There are none tonight, so we're moving on to the consent agenda, which is items 2 through 7. Are there any items anyone would like to pull for further discussion or a motion?
Number 4.
Number 4. Any others? Okay. Mr. Kristoff, item number 4.
Mark? Oh,
Good evening, council members.
this pertains to a contract for survey,
Correct.
West Sacramento Survey. I think I read in the report that Tom Morrow, they were part of the interview process,
Tom Morrow was part of our interview panel.
and so he
Yes.
did not apply for
That
the
is-
surveying duties.
That is correct.
Okay, because I continue along with the rest of the council, continue to look for companies that are located in West Sacramento and having, I'm not going to say a preference, but at least a leg up, so to speak, that they get to work. Because we have some engineering firms and some other kinds of things that I just want to make sure that they're part of the process.
They are part of the process. Tom had actually expressed to us the reason that he did not specifically apply for the city surveyor position was because he would like to work with the developers
Okay,
that do work in West Sacramento.
okay, that's fine, thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Ledesma?
No other questions, no.
All right. No further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, do
I'll
we
make
have
I'll make a motion for the approve the consent agenda.
Second?
Okay, motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No? Okay, passes. Moving on to item number 8. This is a public hearing and consideration of first reading of ordinance 14-3, amending chapter 10.32 of the municipal code relating to bicycles. Mr. Lucan.
Good evening, members, Mayor Pro Tem and members of the City Council. Tonight, we're back to you with an ordinance that we conducted a workshop on a couple weeks ago in regards to adding the ability to have peace officers utilize sidewalks in the course of their duties. We have this returned to you tonight to conduct a public hearing, to waive first reading by title only, and to inform the audience that the second reading would be scheduled for October 15th, 2014. The council requested at the meeting that we provide, or that we ask the police department for a explanation of when they would use that. And so attached to this memo is a memo from the police chief to the city manager explaining the administrative policy of when this would be used. This will now bring this will also bring the vehicle code into conformance, bring our municipal code into sync with the California Vehicle Code, which currently does allow that, so there won't be a conflict between the two anymore. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Lucan?
Just, Mike, so you're referring to on the actual ordinance item, which is 110-32-020, the item B there, which is underscored? Is that what is that when this will be used? 'Cause
Yes. So the mayor asked at the prior meeting for us to come back. He wanted to, and the council wanted to make sure that we were only using, the police department and the bike patrol was only accessing the sidewalk when in active duty, when they're in the pursuit of a suspect or some other thing, and that's exactly what they explained in the memo. So we're not amending the ordinance to reflect that administrative policy. It's just, I think the council wanted to see
I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page. Okay,
Yeah.
we're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, any discussion before we open public hearing? Okay, so we're opening up public hearing. Are there any folks in the audience who would like to speak? Seeing none, public hearing closes. Back to council for discussion or a motion.
Mayor Pro Tem, I would move that we waive first reading, read by title number only, ordinance 14-3, modifying chapter 1032. From the audience, second reading and adoption of ordinance 14-3 is scheduled for October 15th.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Nay. All right, so that motion passes. Moving on to item number 9. Consideration of options for the demolition of 5 vacant buildings at the Stone Lock facility. Mr. Robinson.
Evening. The West Sacramento Redevelopment Agency took control of the Stone Lock property in 2006 following a 3-party transaction that involved the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Port of West Sacramento. The majority of the property has been optioned to the Port of West Sacramento, which has assigned that option to Stone Lock District Holdings, LLC. The report before you tonight relates not to that property, but to the 1.5-acre roughly lock facility itself, which was excluded from the option, is not a part of the option with the port. There are location maps and site maps in your report showing the location of the property we're discussing. Following the dissolution of redevelopment, the lock facility became the property of the West Sacramento Redevelopment Successor Agency. And that means that decisions affecting the property are now subject to Oversight Board and Department of Finance review. The Long-Range Property Management Plan calls for the site to be transferred to the city for public use. In 2013, the Oversight Board approved Resolution 13-12, which authorized this transfer, and the City Council has also approved Resolution 13-58, which authorized the acceptance of the property, but that transfer hasn't occurred yet because staff is still conducting due diligence, and the analysis that went into this staff report is a part of that due diligence. Over the years, despite the city's efforts, the lock facility has been subject to repeated acts of vandalism, including tagging. The buildings on the site have been breached in many cases by people with power tools. The lock mechanisms are now inoperable, and many of the buildings are covered with graffiti. Continuing to come in behind the vandals and clean up after them and try and repair things is not a tenable course. Staff's recommending that the successor agency instead demolish 5 of the buildings on the site in order to make the site less appealing to vandals, to reduce maintenance costs, and to avoid the impending eyesore that the site represents for future drivers across the Mike McGowan Bridge, which is adjacent to the area of the property where these buildings are located. The demolition work that we're proposing is confined to kind of nondescript work buildings on the eastern side of the property and does not include the larger 2-story building that's visible immediately there adjacent to Jefferson Boulevard. The estimated cost of the demolition work is between $226,000 and $260,000. And because the successor agency lacks the funds for this work, it's necessary to secure funding from another source, with the city and former tax increment funds from the recognized obligation payment schedule being the most obvious. In your report, we've listed 3 alternatives that reflect different trade-offs between time and financial exposure for the successor agency. Under the approach that we're recommending, the successor agency would request a loan from the city repayable from future tax increment funds through the recognized obligation payment schedule. That loan and the proposed demolition project would then be presented to the Oversight Board for consideration, which would cause a review by the Department of Finance. If DOF did not object to the loan and to the demolition work, then the city would have a reasonable assurance that the Department of Finance likewise wouldn't object to the loan repayment, which would then be placed on the next recognized obligation payment schedule. If the council and successor agency approve staff's recommendation, we'll bring the proposed loan to the Oversight Board for consideration at its next meeting. So 5 days after that, we would know, after the submittal to DOF, we'd know whether they wish to review the item. If the Department of Finance declines to review the item, that we could proceed with confidence that the loan would be payable from the ROPS. If DOF does decide to review the item, we'd need to come back and get direction, or you could choose to give us direction this evening on what to do in that instance. We feel that the recommendation we've made strikes an appropriate balance between the timing of the cleanup and the exposure to the successor agency, and we hope you'll look favorably on our recommendation. That's the end of my presentation. I can try and answer any questions that you have about the DOF-related piece and the property-related piece. Jack Murphy from Public Works Facility Group is here to answer questions you might have about the demolition project or the site itself.
Okay. Any questions? Just a brief question. Are we deciding now on the actual demolition that these are buildings are going to go? Because I know, just speaking with a couple of the property owners that are kind of looking at that riverfront district, there could be some structures that may be useful in the short term in terms of developing out this and equipment storage and that type of thing. Has there been any discussion at all about that?
Not to salvage the buildings. No, the 5 that we're indicating here would be proposed to be demolished. They would be put in a demolition contract if you approve the item, unless you changed it this evening.
Right, but have you had any outreach at all to others for potential uses of this?
I'm gonna let Jack answer that.
The only other use that we've seen or had interest on was for parking in the area. The 5 buildings, 3 of them are storage buildings. Nobody's had any interest in those. Another building is a crane building, so that's very specific. And the other building is a crane control building with electronics, also very specific. The buildings are very run down now. The windows are broke out, the doors are broke out, the roofs are no good. Also, we had a phase 1 preliminary assessment completed for the buildings, and the buildings are known to cause lead and asbestos containing materials. So a lot of remediation would be necessary to put those back in use.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you.
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Further questions?
It's
All right,
just
thank
a
you.
shame. It's just a shame they've got these lowlifes out there destroying this kind of property.
Yep. All right, do we have a motion on this item?
I'll move the recommended action.
I'll second.
Okay, a motion made and second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. Motion passes. On to item 10. And this is a fiscal year 13-14 year-end review, budget review. Mr. Wright.
Evening, Mayor Pro Tem Johannesson, members of the council. For the last several years, staff has provided the council, with a quarterly update on our budget. And in sort of reviewing those various quarterly updates, I recognize that when we get to the fourth quarter, we're either doing a new 2-year budget or we're doing a supplemental budget, and we never get back to you with how we actually ended the year. We give you projections. We do the budget based on the projections, and we thought, well, we ought to get back and see how close we were on our projections and let you know how the year ended. So first, we're going to look at the general fund, and I'm just really going to summarize very quickly for you. Essentially, what these numbers say is that we did better in the general fund than our budget by about $500,000, and better than we projected by about $100,000. Obviously, those are both good facts. And the reason we did well is both that our revenues came in slightly above what we thought they would, and all of the departments did a good job on their departmental budgets, keeping their O&M underneath their budget. So both our expenditures were low and our revenues were high. Staff continues to be relatively concerned with how tight the budgets are now. And so we will need to be very, very diligent about keeping control of our overtime and keeping our O&M expenditures as budgeted. It really doesn't take too many things outside of the budget anymore to cause us to be out of budget. One or two retirements with buyouts, a workers' comp case or two where you've got to replace people. It just doesn't take a whole lot to be out of sync. So we're going to have to really maintain our budgets. But that's, as you can see, the bottom line is we thought we budgeted a zero budget like we always do. We thought we were going to have about a $400,000 surplus. We're going to end up with a little over $500,000 surplus. So all in all, I think the general fund is doing well. As I stated in the report, we have to be concerned about the increases in PERS and some of the other issues that are definitely going to hit us. Going on to the two funds that have been really challenged because of the recession. First, the Public Works Engineering Fund. You can see that the Public Works Engineering Fund still has a larger operating deficit vis-a-vis the budget and the projected year ends. But this is pretty easily explained. We had a number of Caltrans projects. We had a Caltrans audit of an older project where they pointed out that we did not have an approved ICAP for our indirect costs. And basically, we had to stop billing Caltrans for a number of projects, including things like the Mike McGowan Bridge. So significant work until we get those ICAPs approved. We have gotten at least 2 of the 4 years approved, and the other 2 are submitted. So we hope to get that done soon. What that means is our second year numbers for this fund should make up for the first year, and we should be right where we anticipated being by the end of the second year. So there's an issue on the first year, but it should be solved in the second year. The next fund that's had some challenges, oh, by the way, just going back on the Public Works Engineering, the one comment that I would make is because of the challenges we had in the last 6 years, both Public Works Engineering and Community Development have had to be loaned money by the general fund. And our auditors are clearly saying that we need to have a plan of how that money is going to be paid back. Otherwise, you have to essentially write it off, which we don't want to do because that will have a negative impact on our ratings, which, as you've seen recently, we've gotten lots of good upgrades, which we'd like to keep. So, hopefully the Public Works Engineering, will turn that $61,000, which includes a little bit of a payment back to the general fund, albeit not very substantial. It at least gets us moving in the right direction after the tough 6 years that we've had. So going on to community development. This fund also shows a significantly larger operating deficit compared to both the budget and the projected numbers that we had when we came to you to do the supplemental. There's a variety of reasons for this. There have been a number of projects that were not anticipated that community development staff has had to work on, which has taken away from some of their billable time under their grants. The grants are starting to slow down. We don't have the number of grants coming in that we've had in the past, and so some of that work we're concerned is starting to dry up that we have to pay attention to. We've also had a couple projects, as you know, Delta Lane and the Bridge District, things that we thought were going to be on our ROPS and we were going to be able to bill and get back from the ROPS payments that were denied. And obviously we couldn't stop work on those projects. So that put us a little bit behind. And then finally, we've had at least one development project that we anticipated coming in quicker than it has. And so there was a lot of staff time that was put in the budget for that. Hopefully that development will start to speed up in the second year of the budget. We'll get more work there. But I think we have Ms. Hamilton, obviously, who's our director, and as the finance director, we're certainly looking at this very carefully as we go into the second year of the budget as to whether we're able to get some grants or whether we can move and reassign some people. So staff is keeping an eye on this one very carefully. Because this is, again, another one where we have a significant debt owed back to the general fund that we anticipated I think a $30,000 repayment, nothing significant, but at least moving in the right direction. Again, trying to make sure we keep our auditors happy that we're moving in the right direction on those debts. So the last thing I wanted to just refresh the council's recollection on was the refuse fund. A number of years back, when we were looking at water rates, council decided to keep the refuge rates as they were at the time. We had a fairly significant cash surplus, so we did that. But as you can see, we ran about a $500,000 deficit in this fund this year. We anticipate another $500,000 next year. We have about $1 million in cash reserve right now, so we'll still be fine at the end of next year. But we're getting pretty close now for a fund like this. We have an increase budgeted for 15-16, so that should keep us flat. But what it really means is we got to keep an eye on this one, that there's no significant increases in our costs, because $500,000 in a refuge fund can go pretty quickly. We're going to be renegotiating our deal with on refuge here, I believe, fairly quickly. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that and make sure we keep the costs under control. So with that, I'd be more than glad to answer any questions if there are any on the budget. But I think overall, we came $100,000 from what we projected on a $40 million general fund budget. So I feel that Natish did a pretty good job.
All right, questions?
Okay. Yeah,
Is now the time to start to take the $3 water rate decrease that Measure A and B initiated? Is now the time to reduce that $3? Or is it next year, or what are we doing?
Well, that very apropos, a timely question. So we will be coming back to the council in 2 weeks on the 15th with actually 3 significant workshops that we'll be looking for council direction. One will be on our roads that Dennis Ambia will be presenting to give you a sense of what we need to maintain the roads as we currently have them at the ratings that the council has directed. One will be on Measure K to look at the fact that we have more money in the subsidy than we ever anticipated when we did it, and get some direction on whether you want us to adjust that and some options on how we could adjust it. And the third will be a presentation on what we're calling sort of the financing of our major capital projects. So flood, streetcar, and bridges, the big projects, and how we're going to finance those with the cash flow issues that come with financing $500 million and $100 million projects. So we'll be here on the 15th with 3 workshops and certainly be looking at that issue.
Mr. Ledesma.
Hi, Phil. Thanks for the update and giving us a year and look. I do have some questions.
Sure.
So you're right. The general fund does look good. And I appreciate the work we've done around this. I too was concerned by your summary of the Public Works and the Community Development Fund, because those operating deficits are ones that obviously could impact the general fund. They do impact the general fund, and especially if we don't get the revenues back. So the Public Works one sounds like that is money that we are 100% certain we'll get. Is it a timing issue?
I would never say 100%, but I've learned not to say 100%, but I'm 95%.
Okay.
It is a timing issue.
It's just a timing issue, okay. And I'll get to that in a second. Okay, so then on the Community Development Fund, so what I worry about on this one are 2 things from a budgeting standpoint, and that it occurs to me this is really a repercussion or of kind of the post-redevelopment budgeting. We don't have a redevelopment agency anymore where we can have revenues to pay for staff time to work on projects that will come at some point in the future. Am I?
No, you're correct. That's
Yes,
certainly, been that's given us a safety net to allow us to cash flow that work and
Correct.
Get the money back.
So we always had that agency and the revenues coming in as an early investment into into those projects so that when they came through, permitting fees and everything else that came, and the tax revenue came, it paid for itself. But for real-life projects that occurred and with it outside RDA, those could be worked on billable hours when we had a healthy development going on. And so I'm just wondering out loud, sort of on or I'm asking out loud, how are we approaching this from a budgeting standpoint? Because this problem isn't going to go away. We still have projects, we still have opportunities that we are pursuing, that we want to pursue, and either does economic development roll up to community development in this fund, or
No, the Fund 106 Economic Development is
Separate.
It's a general fund. Those revenues that we get back through the elimination of redevelopment technically are general fund dollars.
Okay.
So they're in Fund 106. We use some of that money. We've clearly, as the council has approved in the budget, some of that money is used for staff to manage some of those projects. But, the difference that you're identifying is the difference of, 23, 24 million in redevelopment when we had it to 3 or 4 million that we have now coming back to us through the ROPS process. So that's a significant
I
change.
clearly understand that, but either we're going to do two things: is this a structural issue, or how are we going to solve this? Because if we're continuing to work on these projects, which we've all articulated, Delta Lane is the perfect example. We have to get that project done. Any work on, I'm just thinking of other projects, the Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan, which isn't bringing in any revenue, but community development staff is probably working on. I'm just thinking are we planning for this or readjusting? Are we looking at how we're budgeting for these types of items to truly capture the cost to us as a city? Because right now we're just running a deficit in community development and borrowing from the general fund to cover those costs. But if there were costs for us for sort of our R&D work or our pre-planning work, that's sort of what I'm getting at.
Oh, yeah, no, you're identifying the flag that went up with the finance and the community development, the city manager's office, when we ran these last numbers, and we are immediately working on, how much billable work do we have, who can do it, what work is community development doing that we can pull them off of because it's not billable, that we can do either in the city manager's office or the finance department can assist in. So we're already making adjustments. We'll continue to make adjustments. We'll come back with a first quarter report and a second quarter report. So we definitely see the potential challenge, and Charlene is well aware of it. Finance is obviously well aware of it. Let the city manager's office know, and that is exactly what we're doing, is spending this first quarter, second quarter, saying, what's the plan?
Well, yeah, I know you're clearly aware of the need, the plan to eliminate or reduce down a $500,000 deficit. And that's step one. I'm assuming you've articulated that it has to get done. But going into future years, we still have I guess my question is more of kind of a strategic planning one, is that if this is an area that is going to obviously remain an issue, because we're going to accrue more billable hours on items that aren't producing revenue.
We probably will need more of the general community investment 106 contribution for this type of activities. So the things that are non-billable. So we'll probably need to increase that.
Yeah, and I'm raising a red flag because I know where that 106 is intended to be.
Right.
Yes.
Which is
Community
from
investment.
That's correct.
And that's part of the reason we're coming back on the 15th when we're talking about the flood projects and the bridges. We're also going to be talking about 106 Measure G so that we can get some direction for the council. Yes, you can spend money on these projects, but those are not ones that we intend. So that's part of the idea, and we need that direction in order to determine, are we sustainable at the level we are now, or do we have to look at?
And that's the question I'm getting at, because you're right. There's part one of this is that we have this issue, and part two is how do we manage that? Because I don't think anybody on this council, for myself, I don't want to give up the kind of strategic view we have and going after and funding and doing the pre-work that gets us the project a year or two down the line. And I conceptually don't have an issue with using 106 funds for some of that if it is towards, so well, I know we'll have that discussion. I am though worried, and I'm glad to hear you say it, that you're starting to think about how we manage the budget and bridge this gap that exists. Because again, we sit in the room every January, February, whenever it is this year for our strategic planning meeting, and we articulate our vision. There are opportunities that come along down the line, but what this is clearly telling me is that there's a finite number of dollars that we have, and we can't do everything we want, or we have to find another way to approach it, recognizing that our time is money, and the opportunities we choose to go after are ones that we need to be very careful about. And selective about. So that's what this is saying to me, and so I'm glad. I had no doubt you guys you wouldn't have brought it up if you didn't have a plan, but it is important we have a plan to adjust it, and I know we'll get there, but I'm more interested in okay, now we got a long-term issue.
Right.
Because you also proved, and property taxes, aren't back all the way.
Yeah, they're not close, actually.
Yeah, and so, again, with flat revenues coming from other parts of the general fund, I just worry about it straining the general fund a little bit. So, all right.
And you've identified it accurately from the personnel standpoint, and part of what we're going to be coming back on the 15th is to point out the same thing from just our overall financial capacity. So we have both the how do we pay for the people to get the work done, and then how much money do we have available to us to do the project?
Great point, because if we're using it all for people, we don't have, I think what the voters told us through Measure G was, if we have an extra $100,000 in Fund 106, and that helps us leverage another whatever amount for a grant we might get, we want that money available. That's what we're supposed to be going after. And if it's all being soaked up by staff time, you're right, that's an issue. So, good point. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Sandine?
Thank you for the year-end report, and I appreciate the containment work that's being done on all levels looking at this, and I think as Mr. Ledesma said, just continuing to manage very carefully, even it seems sometimes perhaps on the margin. I think in terms of the staff report, the most alarming for me, and being new on the council, was the last paragraph where you're pointing out what's ahead or what's potentially ahead, because two of those items are huge potential structural issues we'll have to deal with, PERS and then the health insurance premiums. And then I think to Mr. Ledesma's point too, the limited flexibility that we may end up facing. I have faith that we'll end up with some creative solutions, and I do think that we'll start to see the turnaround in the economy, although it'll lag coming to us because receiving taxes will lag. So I'm hopeful for the future, and I appreciate seeing this, but it is the gravity of this moving forward, and knowing all the things we want to achieve as a city. I think we'll have some tough discussions ahead of us.
I agree.
Thank you. Mr. Christoph?
Yeah, I think that what Mr. Ledesma is really sort of pointing out is the tragedy of losing the agency. That has absolutely just really set a city like ours back quite a ways. So we came up with the idea of Fund 106. And I think what's going to happen with Fund 106, and that is we're going to get less money, and so less work will get done. But we have to make that determination. We're going to have to make that call, and that is really the tragedy, because there are some big budget items, streetcar flood and bridges, and those are going to have to really be whittled down, I'm afraid, because there's not going to be enough money in 106 to cover everything, to cover them all. And so that's why I'm really sort of looking forward to the future workshops that are coming up, because we need to talk to our people. The people out there need to understand what happened with losing the agency, how it affected us, and at the same time, there's really less money to go around. Now, we can put a few pennies here and a few pennies here and a few pennies here and work on each one of them. But we're going to have to make sure that there's enough money so that substantial work can get done in order to keep the momentum going. In other words, get your nose under the tent on these projects and continue to fund them. I think, applying for grants and matching funds and all the other kinds of things, there's some things to do there, and there's some things that we can work with. But at the same time, I don't know, it'll be real interesting to see what you come back with and, what we can do. Because, quite frankly, if you put $100,000 towards streetcar, that's a pebble on the beach. I mean, that's nothing. That is, nobody will see anything that gets done with $100,000. And the same thing goes for flood. I mean, that is such a small component of what is actually necessary that people, our constituents, don't see the result. And that's why it's really important for us, especially, I can speak to flood, that we're working with the feds, we're working with the state, and we're looking for substantial amounts of money to come back in those, from those two very large agencies. But anyway, it'll be very interesting.
Thank you, Mr. Christoph. I augment my colleagues' comments on community development and the implications of the demise of redevelopment. I'm glad to see that we are running in the black general fund. But, I think folks that are looking at this budget should understand we have a $40 million budget and we have a $500,000 cushion. So we're not there. We're still very tight. We've got the issue of PERS coming up, medical insurance, and some of the other issues you've identified, property tax reassessments, big things that could come up that could wipe that away in a heartbeat. So, it's public works seems to be a timing issue. 95% certain we'll get the money back, I think, is probably as good as it gets in government work. And then, down to the community development department. I think, we talk about this each year, but really it does look, we don't have the money to go out and just develop away. We have the money to strategically look at strategic investments. And that's about it right now. And I know during our strategy session, beginning of next year, we'll talk about the priorities of that. But it's a shame because we've got so many things that are happening right now. The region is just at the verge of bursting with development. And I know my colleagues, we all want to be in the game. We want to make sure we're not flat-footed when that development comes in. So there are certain things that we have to do to make sure that we can capitalize on this investment. And, things like, obviously, flood protection, streetcar, in my view, and other things that are really necessary to bring this in. So, and the other issue is, as you've mentioned in this report, that, working staff to the bone. And, that's a concern, too, because how long can this go on? And so we're going to eventually look at how we can increase capacity with work and bring more revenue in to maybe compensate for that, or I'm just not sure where the other cuts are going to come from because we've spent 7 years cutting. And we're again, down to the bone. We're working our staff just very, very strongly. We've got a tight schedule of the strategic investments that we think we need. So there's not a whole lot we can do here. It's looking better. But I think when we first started this 7 years ago, we thought this was going to be a 20-year downturn. We're already 7 years into it, so maybe that prediction is more or less accurate. But I certainly appreciate your presentation and the brevity of your format. I think adds to the ability to discuss it in concepts at this point. So
I have one more question. Since
Yes.
we talked a little bit about healthcare, because healthcare is going to be a major budget issue for us or maybe not a major one, but it's going to be a budget issue for us in the future. One of the things we're doing, as I go to the grocery store or whatever, some people will stop and they will ask, we've got these two propositions, 45 and 46, and they're saying, which one saves us the money? And I'm going, oh, wait a minute, that's really not an issue that the city, or in the past, we've never gotten into anything like that. But there's some things that are going on with those various propositions that are very political and all the other kinds of things. So I guess one of the things I'm wondering is as you look at those various propositions, is there one that saves the city a ton of money versus the other? And so I really didn't know how to answer the people that I was talking to, because it's a pretty complicated issue, and you see all this stuff on television, and there's some things that, if you just look at it, they just make sense. But at the same time, those ads are so skewed that you just shake your head, and you say you just really can't believe what you see on the ads. You've got to read the ballot initiative or whatever it is, and then make your own decision.
Well, I have not analyzed those. I'll certainly look at them, and if I can give you any insight, I will. Yeah. I would say on the healthcare.
I just want to save a pot of money for the city if I can.
Sure, of course. So do I.
I don't think it's going to help in either one of them.
I will say on the healthcare, the council direction that they've given to staff on all of our negotiations, we've put a lid on our healthcare costs. So the amount of the increases is definitely going to be limited. We have caps on all of our accruals, but most of our employees haven't reached the cap. So we still have, that's why I point out that there's going to be increases that will affect us. But on the long term, I think we've got some solutions to that. And except for at some point, if healthcare is costing our employees more than their house payment, the pressure is going to be there from our employees just going, yeah, you've solved the city problem, but now I can't pay my house payment because my medical payment. So that's an issue that we'll deal with if it gets to that point. I'm looking forward to the 15th of October. I think that's going to be a fun workshop, because we're talking about a lot of projects that are, I think we said the minimum is going to be $150 million to get on this list. So we have a lot of major projects, and we think we've got some solutions that you'll like, but we obviously are looking for you for direction. Yeah. The challenge that we're seeing right now, just giving you a bit of a preview, is we think we can figure out how to cash flow and fund all the big ones, but we don't think we're going to have much left after that. And that's what we're going to need some direction from you.
And if I may, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I just want to clarify kind of the sense of my comments, in that it very much, I know you folks are doing great work, staff is doing great work. And the direction we're heading is certainly the right one. And Mr. Kristoff is absolutely right. This is a result of kind of the post-redevelopment budgeting cycle that it's left us with. Because we for us, it's always been, we used redevelopment, and we got left with an awful lot of, we didn't get left with it, but those who used it the best were hit the hardest, because they didn't have any cash around because they used it. So now here we are, 4 years later, and we don't have that, and we still have these projects, because we know we still have a city to build, a community to build, that will generate future property taxes, sales taxes from the retail, and whatever else we get. So my comments weren't directed to, I don't want that misconstrued at all with staff and the work you're doing, because I know you're trying to figure it out. And my question was really based on the fact that we still haven't kind of wrestled or slayed that dragon yet, or figured it out. And we're on our way, I know, with a lot of big projects, and we're figuring them out with creative tools. The IFD is a financing tool that I'm thinking of as one creative way we address this. But there's still other things we need to do to kind of get to those big projects. So probably what you're telling me is the preview is the challenge is what do we do about the bunch of little ones that matter just as much. And so I just want to make sure I was clear on that point with you folks. So
yeah, the preview is the middle and smaller ones in the short term, because you're right, previewing again what we're going to talk about. we think we have some long-term creative solutions, as Councilwoman Sandine said, in the IFDs. And so we think we got a long-term solution. We think we have a short-term solution to the big major project, which is good news. But we have this hole in the middle. You know, what do we do for the next 5 years while we're trying to, you know, get the IFD revenue where it can actually help us do some of the things that we know the council wants us to do. So that's where we're going to come back and sort of show you all that on the 15th to get some direction from you and continue to put on our creative thinking caps. And I'm very confident our staff has the ability to think outside the box with your leadership, and we'll figure it out.
Very good. Any other questions? All right, thank you. That was an information item. So on to item number 11, council calendar.
Yes, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, tomorrow at 11 o'clock is our city employee picnic. It's going to be from 11 to 2 at the boat ramp, and the council is welcome to stop by and say hello to the employees and have lunch with us if you like. This weekend is the TBD Festival at the Bridge Fest, and those preparations are underway right now. The City School 2x2 that's currently noted as on Monday has been canceled, and it's been tentatively rescheduled for October 20th. We're waiting to hear from the 2x2 members on that. But on the 11th, not on your calendar, but from 10 to 2 is in addition to the Turner Library 5th birthday celebration at 1 p.m., the Station 45 is going to have their annual open house. And then finally, not on your calendar, but on the 28th at 9 o'clock is our demolition of the silos at the CEMEX site. So that's going to be taking place on that date. We'll be having some more information going out on that.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. City manager report?
Well, Mayor Pro Tem and Council, in the last conversation, you talked about infrastructure finance districts. The governor earlier in the week did sign a bill, SB 628 was signed. It basically enhances IFDs, primarily in the area of issuing bonds, and moves the requirement from 2/3 voter approval of the voters in that district to 55%. We watched that bill very closely to see there were no add-ons, and we were very pleased. It got to the governor's desk that way, and he did sign it. So we'll come back on the meeting of the 15th with the issue of the Bridge District IFD. Those ballots are out now with the property owners. We'll come back on the 15th with the notion of actually setting that IFD up in the Bridge District.
Thank you. City attorney report? All right. Any staff direction from council members? None? Any future agenda items? None? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion adjourned. Okay.